joining us this afternoon. Got a lot of great discussions coming up. Jason, to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next project, so now we're moving on to account 1, level 2 project amendments. We have one of those. It's on page 98 of the recommendations notebook. This is the Pavilion groundwater supply for the town of Pavilion. There was a level 2 study to investigate developing additional groundwater supply for the town of Pavilion. And when we put that scope together for the consultants to compare apples to apples, I think we put in a budget for actually drilling the well. And now that they've got cost estimates in from sub-consultants or drillers to drill that, it's not enough money to complete the well. So this is an amendment to that study of $429,000 so they can complete that. And okay, if you want to.
Mr. Chairman, Commission, Committee, I am Jeff Gee with James Gorson Associates. We're the consultants on the project. I believe Raymond Choate, who is a representative, is also online. He is not?
Not yet.
Okay.
He is now.
So, okay. So if you have any questions, we're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So now we will be moving on to our account 1, level 1 projects. First one will be on page 107 of the recommendations. Oh, I'm sorry. We need so that was the only level 2 study.
So we're gonna
So we need to take action.
get a motion on that one. Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just confused, Director. I thought we stopped right after we talked about Burns and we didn't vote on a block, but maybe we did. And I didn't know who voted on it, motioned it and seconded it. Maybe we did vote on that block.
Mr. Chairman, we voted on, or you guys voted on, all the level 2 projects
Okay.
in account 1.
I just didn't write it down, maybe because we were rushing off to lunch. Sorry, I apologize.
And now we're on level 2 amendments, and there's just the one Pavilion groundwater supply.
Thank you.
Great. So commissioners, do I have a motion for the Pavilion project?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the Pavilion groundwater supply project. Level 1 project. Or level 2.
Yeah. Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. A motion and a second. Any additional comments or discussion? Comments or discussion? With that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Motion passes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, now we are on to account 1, level 1 projects. So there's a number of master plans that we discussed and the commission approved back at the May meeting, and there was quite a bit of discussion on all these planning projects. So again, just like the block of projects we did right before lunch, all that we're doing differently is we're taking the dollar amounts that from those winning consultants through that consultant selection process and plugging it into the recommendations. So Alpine Water Master Plan, originally in May, we had a to be determined cost estimate that went through a competitive process, and the winning consultant was $153,000. And Bear Oil Water Master Plan, the final dollar amount, $147,000. Chug Water Master Plan, $209,000. Douglas Water Master Plan, $286,000. We had the Green River Rock Springs Sweetwater County Joint Powers Water Board Regional Water Master Plan for $432,000. the Hudson Water Master Plan for 210. We have a watershed study, the Salt River Watershed Study for 344,000. The Shoshone Municipal Pipeline Regional Water Master Plan came in at 216,000, and the Sinclair Water Master Plan came in at 147,000. So if anybody has any questions, I can sure, try to answer anyone of specific to a particular project. Or you guys could just consider those in a block.
We're going to be voting on this block of level 1 projects. If anybody has any questions on the Alpine Water Master Plan, completely through the Sinclair Water Master Plans, any questions for those representatives that might be here in the audience, or any questions? I think we kind of hashed them to death in the last one, so I think we're pretty good. So with that, questions from select water? No? Okay, we just need to get an approval for that block. So do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of account 1, level 1 projects. Starting with Alpine through the Sinclair Water Master Plan in the amount of $2,144,000. And I'd ask for a second.
So with that, I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Motion carries.
So the next agenda item would be, let's see, we're on the UW Office of Water Programs. This is on page 187 of your recommendation.
Speaker, you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, this is just information for me. So as these master plans are created, are they the same consultants who end up designing the projects? And wondering, well, you get what I'm wondering about. I'm just wondering, is it the same consultants that do master plans that then end up bidding on design of these projects? Or is it totally different kind of consultant?
Mr. Chairman, I would say in some instances, yes, ends up being the same consultant. I think sometimes it's based on how well they do on the master plan and then what projects come out of the master plan. Sometimes we need to go into a level 2 study to understand which alternative is going to be best to take care of, say, their number 1 priority and get a good cost estimate to go into construction. And I think if there's a good relationship developed between the sponsor and that consultant, oftentimes they would move forward. But the level 2 studies, if it were to go that route, would go through the same competitive consultant selection process where we'd put out a RFP with the scope of work and then get a number of consultants coming in, putting proposals together, going through interviews, all that stuff. So they're not just automatically selected, by default for a level 2 study. If it went directly to a construction project, then the sponsor could contract directly with them. And then they have to follow their own statutes as far as the competitive process or getting a waiver to go with that consultant.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, members of Select Water. I'm Greg Kerr, Director of the Office of Water Programs at the University of Wyoming. I wanted to visit with you today about our request for funding for our biennium of the Office of Water Programs. The Office of Water Programs is our management division of the is our management division of our water program. Through that, we coordinate water research needs of the state and region. Our cooperative program includes funding from the USGS and also resources from the University of Wyoming, combined with state support through the Water Development Commission in order to utilize resources at the University of Wyoming to address water-related research needs of the state. So within the Office of Water Programs, We administer the water research program that is next on your agenda. So if you have any questions about the office water programs, its administration, I'd be happy to answer them.
Is for Greg. Yes, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I just wondered, where is your office housed? Is it in the, I should probably know this, so forgive my ignorance. Is it in the College of Ag? Which department are you housed in, and how do you interact with the Ag department? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, we are actually a division of the Office of Research and Economic Development. So we work with all departments on campus. Anyone that has anything to do with water is involved in our program. They can propose on the projects that we have, depending on where they're at. For instance, agriculture, as you mentioned, we have various divisions within agriculture that propose on projects that we fund through them, whether it's agricultural economics or natural resources through the Ag College. So we work closely with the Ag College.
We've got another question, Senator.
Chairman, could you, I guess, enlighten me on where the $175,000 is, used, what it's used for?
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the 175 is a biennium amount. So annually, we have administrative costs for part-time people for salaries. We run a tight ship. So we utilize 2 additional part-time people to help with the program. We combine that with USGS dollars. So we can take administrative money. We apply every year to the USGS. We use that for information dissemination, use it for salary money, and we use it for help support research, even through our administrative budget. If we have money that we can utilize in our research projects, then we'll apply that to our leveraging funds from the USGS and the university to fund research.
Questions, commissioners? So we need an approval for the 175,000.
Yes.
Okay, do I have a motion? Do I have a second? Got a motion and a second? Any other discussions, further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Motion carries. Thanks, Greg.
So I'll continue with the water research program. This is for your information only in the notebook. We are in the process now where you approved in May the RFP, both the commission and Select Water approved an RFP to be released at the University of Wyoming for faculty members to propose on. That was released in September, and with proposals due the first part of October. Through our process and our RFP, we received 3 proposals for research. They all addressed issues, the priorities that we had listed in the RFP. We are now in the review process. So at your next meeting in January, you'll have a ranking from our advisory committee of the 3 projects that we received. And then you can act on those individual rankings. One thing I note about these projects, and it's kind of interesting, the 3 projects that we got are now addressing solutions to certain problems that we've funded other projects to identify various areas now. These 3 actually look at direct solutions to information that we've gotten from other projects. So it's kind of interesting But these three projects came out that way. So no action to be taken today on these, just for your information for the next meeting.
Do we have any questions for the doctor? Commissioners? Oh, Senator Hicks?
About a research project trying to identify the source and remediation of nitrogen and groundwater for burns. My guess is you guys can resolve that issue for a lot cheaper than $2 million for a new well, but that's just my thoughts.
Any other comments? Select water? Okay, thank you.
Chairman,
Thanks for that
thank you.
report.
Page 192 now. And this is a recommendation of transfer of funds from Water Development Account 1 to Water Development Account 2. And you recall in previous years, we've done this where we don't get as much of the mineral severance tax distribution account funds into account 2. And because of the demand in account 2 for rehab projects, we've moved some of that money to take care of that demand. So we're going to request the same thing this year. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about all of the account 2 projects. And in order to fund those per our recommendations, we're asking that $7 million from account 1 be transferred to account 2. So when we get to the legislation, if you recall in previous years, all those projects, or a number of the projects in account 2 will be contingent upon the transfer from account 1 to account 2 in the omnibus bill. So just to walk you through this real quick, again, we're on page 192. You can see near the bottom here, we've got the 2 account summaries. And this is what we talked about earlier. We start with almost 26 million in account 1, and the account 2 is the lower summary, 10.5 million. In that account 1, we would transfer the 7 million plus the recommended funding projects that we talked about today equate to $6,126,951. So you remove those 2 from the original 25 or 26 million. And then for next year, we would end up with 12,834,628 for projects next year, the second year of the biennium. And then if you go down and look at account 2, same thing, 10,000,005 is what we start with. We received the 7 million from account 2. And then with the recommendations that we will hear tomorrow, that's a debit of 11,921,600, and you would end up with roughly 5.6 million again for next year's projects. So about half of what we started with in each account. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So is that 7 million number pretty static? Is it a percentage? How do you choose that? Just based on projects? Has it fluctuated a lot recently? Just a little history on that for me.
Mr. Chairman, I can't remember exactly what previous years have been, but they've been in the same ballpark, I would say. And the way we determine that is we go down through our projects, we figure out which one we can recommend within the budgets we have. And then those projects in account 2, we just figure out what the deficit is to get those funded. And we came up with 6 million some odd dollars, and we rounded it to 7.
Questions for the director? Commissioners? Select water? Okay. What's your flavor? We have a motion? What? We have a motion and a second? Yeah, we got a motion and a second, so any other discussion? We got a motion and a second. Do we have any other discussion? No? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Motion carries.
All right. Mr. Chairman, that ends our account 1 recommendations, so we can move on to agenda item number 8, which would be the 2024 funding recommendations for our dam and reservoir program, or account 3. And the first one of those is on, I haven't clicked it. Page 194 of the recommendation notebook. Get caught up myself here. Okay, so this is the one we had quite an extensive conversation on in August. This is the Levitt Reservoir expansion and with the Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District. As you recall, there was discussion about the bids that were put out for Levitt here recently, and they had enough funding to award the first 3 bid packages, and we're requesting some support to award those and then come back through the November meeting in the omnibus bill for some additional money to rebid that 4th bid package, which was the transfer pipeline. And so that's what we have in front of us here today. The recommendation is for an additional $10,850,000 to cover that 3rd or 4th bid package. That would be at 100% grant. So when you add that back into the existing grants and loans, and as you recall over the years, as this project has continued to increase in costs, the affordability and willingness to pay of the sponsor is based on a $25 per acre foot cost assessment to their users. And we've tried to stick to that, which is why this is a 100% grant. So when you look at the final numbers, you'd be at about a 98.07% grant and a 1.93% loan of $1,716,000. With that, I guess I would ask if there's any questions, and we do have a sponsor representative, so I'll ask them to come up.
While they're coming up, Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the director. And under the statutory framework, when we get to that high level of cost share, it provides for the opportunity for that to be a state-owned facility. Currently, this would still be a district-owned facility, but if there's been any discussion with the sponsor or the commission as to whether this would be an interest to the state to retain this facility or not.
Mr. Chairman, I would say early on, we had general discussion about this in commission meetings in regards to, I think the interest would be to have local control of that particular project, which would be the Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District. When we enter into these projects, we expect the sponsor to be able to operate and maintain those facilities and own them for the perpetuity or the life of the project. So if the state were to choose to look into that, of course, that would require extra expenses on our part, because we would probably most likely be operating and maintaining it or working with a district to operate and maintain it. But, you know, we'd have to set up an operation and maintenance account like we do for High Savory to pay for those types of things. So that's been the extent of the conversation at this point.
Thank you.
Come on up, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my general question is who's going to look after this asset? The state's pretty well bought most of it. How do we have, what reassurances do we have that that asset's going to be taken care of in a way that we think is appropriate? I mean, is there any oversight, I guess is my question, over a project where there's this large of a funding percentage coming from the state? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, we've been involved heavily with all the planning, the NEPA, the design aspects of the project. As I mentioned earlier, we'd have the emergency action plan, and as part of the design work, we put together all the operation and maintenance manuals. We technically, that's RJH, who Kevin Meininger on the left here in a blue shirt represents. And then I keep saying we because I've been involved in this project for so long. I feel like part of the group. But anyway, I think there would be training to the Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District on how to operate that facility, plus all the manuals and manufacturers specs on the different components of the project to make sure that they're capable of doing that. I think I've always talked about, you know, if there's questions, we have our dam and reservoir program, whatever help we can provide or questions. And And I guess additional questions to the engineer who originally designed it too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up. Well, I guess back to my original question, what compels them to do what you may ask them to do? Is there anything that does that?
Mr. Chairman, I'd say it's a high hazard structure, and if they don't maintain it, then it's their liability if something goes wrong. So that's a pretty good incentive, in my opinion, to keep it operated and maintained to the best of their ability.
Chairman? Who owns the water? Who will own the water in that dam?
Mr. Chairman, the Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District holds the water rights, storage rights within that reservoir, or will. It was their name on the application to the state engineer's office.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering, what, so we've been seeing these project increases come along and we've gone to 50-50 and changed some of the amounts. And so this is a pretty big ask. It's $10 million. It's a good project, but have you talked about a little bit more of the burden shifting toward the district, at least some of it, because it's a lot of money?
Mr. Chairman, we haven't had a lot of discussion on that just because when they originally, I think, pulled their future membership, they landed on, okay, what can we get this project built for and the assessments we can charge folks to support that and purchase shares in that reservoir. And that's how they came up with the $25 per acre foot. So I think they would have to go back to the drawing board to figure out would everybody be willing to, assess themselves or pay an assessment of $30 or $35. And I don't know, maybe that's a better question for the sponsor as well.
So, Mr. Chairman, a couple of questions within that 25 and getting back to some of the discussions is as part of that, and whoever wants to ask to be dedicated towards a sinking fund just for O&M. I'm assuming that's be normal project component. I see a head shaking yes. And the other thing, when I'm looking at the description of the 1,500 acre foot conservation pool, how are the water rights filed for the reservoir? So a little over 5,000. But who owns that 1,500 acre feet in the conservation pool? And as their permit conditions with the Army Corps, it requires the maintenance of that 1,500 acre foot conservation pool. So what are the permit conditions relative to the water rights filing?
Mr. Chairman, I should have knew you were going to ask that question, Senator Hicks. And now I can't remember for sure, but the conservation pool water rights still under the name of the Shell Valley Watershed Improvement District. I don't recall. I can't remember off the top of my head. The 404 permit conditions on that. I could get back to you on the side on that.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that question is sometimes we get the hydrology wrong, and these reservoirs don't yield quite what we think they're going to yield. And then what I wanted to know is if there's not a permit restriction on there, and it's just a water rights component for that conservation pool, as to whether the district can encroach upon that under those really drouthy scenarios. In other words, we want to service the primary purpose of the reservoirs to supply supplemental irrigation. And then if there's no permit conditions associated with the 404 permit, can the district encroach into the conservation pool? Seems how they own the water rights. And
my recollection is all of the NEPA that was completed called it a conservation pool. Slightly different from High Savory, which was kind of what we know called an inviolate pool. And so I think the expectation is the conservation pool would remain. It would not be turned around and used for irrigation, but that you could take the water surface right down to that conservation pool and you ended up 6 inches into it because of evaporation by the next spring, that would probably be allowable.
Well,
But you
and
wouldn't be
even
using
under
it
that
for-
terms and condition, conservation is going to be defined as is by the district. And so if it was the determination and consultation that they wanted to leave that in the creek or back in the system for conservation purposes, I just curious as we move forward with dam and reservoir projects and we get into these, is that permit conditions that's driving these conservation, even though the NEPA identified all that stuff, is there the ability of the flexibility to encroach into those under those 1 out of 50-year drought conditions for those irrigators? And so, but you can get back to me on that question.
Yeah, and I would say there's probably not the flexibility to go into it and, irrigate 500 acre feet out of it or 1,000 acre feet because you have a dry year. I think the expectation is, and kind of the way the project was presented during the entire process, was that that was going to be a conservation pool for fisheries and public benefits and so on. So I suppose if we got into that situation, we could have that conversation with the permitting agencies and see how that worked out, but that wasn't the original intent.
That's all I had.
Any other questions? Select water. Commissioners? Well, that's it. Thank you. So we need a motion then on this project.
We've got, Mr. Chairman, we do have 2 projects in the level 3 amendments. If you want to take them as a block, or you can sure take them individually too.
Let's take them as a block.
Okay. The next project is on page 196, and this is Middle Piney Reservoir. The state of Wyoming is, I guess, technically the contracting agency in this particular case because we hold the Water Development Commission holds the special use permit with the Bridger Teton National Forest to reconstruct the dam and then operate the facility. The project is substantially complete, doing some cleanup work with piezometers, and that'll probably spill into next year. And the intention is to have our first fill this coming spring of 2024. And the reversion date on the funding is July 1st of 2024. So we, just to be safe, even though that money is under contract, either with our engineering firm or with NW Construction, which is the actual construction firm, we'd feel better if we just extended the reversion date by a year to, I guess, get us through that first fill and, I guess, operational year. So that's the reason for the request on the extension of the reversion date. I'd ask if there's any questions.
Any questions for the director, commissioners? Any questions, Select Water? Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, I would ask for your consideration of the 2 account 3 level 3 amendments, Levitt Reservoir expansion and Middle Piney Reservoir.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any questions? With that, if you approve, say aye.
Aye.
No, if you don't. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last agenda item for the Water Development Commission's consideration for today is on page 198. And this is also an account 3 and the sponsors contingency fund. So just like all the other account 1, 2, and 3, we have a sponsors contingency fund for account 3. And that's for these unforeseen situations that come up, either if bids come in high. In account 3, we're addressing those through actual legislation like we just talked about with Levitt Reservoir. But if for some reason there's a change in conditions or something to that effect that we need to react quickly to, that's why we have sponsor contingency funds. No different than account 1, where a project might come in $300,000, higher we always would come back to the body. It just appropriates funds, so you don't have to go back through an entire legislative session in case you need a little bit of extra money to get over whatever that issue might be that comes up. When we start talking about sponsor contingency funds for account 3 and reservoirs, we get to talking about larger dollars because the issues can be larger in scale. So as you can see, as you work down to the existing legislation in that particular document, when this account or sponsor contingency fund for account 3 was set up in 2020, we put $10 million in it. And then in 2022, as we were getting close to bidding out Levitt Reservoir, we added an additional $25 million to it to give us a balance of $35 million. And we had some requests out of that from Middle Piney Reservoir, as you see under project appropriations, and then of course from Levitt Reservoir expansion, which went through the omnibus bill last year. So you add those two up, and of the 35 million, $34,725,000 has been accounted for through the Levitt and Middle Piney projects, which leaves an uncommitted balance of $275,000. So we just want to replenish that account, knowing we're entering into now construction of Levitt Reservoir, just in case. So we have some funds that we can react quickly if we need to on projects into the future. And we'd suggest $10 million to be put back into that account or added to that account. And with that, I'd ask if there's any questions.
Mr. Chairman. Jason, what's the balance in account 3?
The account 3 balance before the projects we just talked about is $61,062,212. So $61 million.
So the source of the appropriation is going to come out of account 3 out of the 61, as the 10 would go into contingency fund, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, I just think that you may want to look at maybe considering a little more into the contingency fund. We just saw that in 2 years, we burned through $35 million in the contingency fund. And it's worth looking at, probably trying to get that up more in that $20 million range, just something to consider.
Mr. Chairman, I would not be opposed to that whatsoever. We were kind of batting that around in the office ourselves. I erred on the side of conservatism just because of all the dollars we've been talking about, but knowing that our next construction we've got more of these level 3 construction projects in the work for account 3. We've got some things to work through with some of them, but I don't think that's a bad idea.
Would you like this board to put a motion forward for adding $30 million to this account?
Mr. Chairman, I would say if you wanted to increase it, I would increase it to a $20 million discretionary fund, which would leave $30 million in the account in round numbers. Unappropriated.
Any other questions, you guys? Commissioners, how do you feel?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to increase the sponsors contingency fund account 3 by $20 million.
You have a motion. Do I have a second?
20. Well, 220.
We have a motion, a second. Discussion? Any further discussion, Select Water? Discussion? With that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that brings us to the end of our Water Development Commission agenda for today. I think the next thing would be to move into the Select Water Committee agenda. And just a quick, so tomorrow we will address all of account 2 recommendations first thing in the morning. I don't anticipate that taking too long, but it's hard to predict sometimes. So, and then we will talk about some stuff on Goshen Irrigation District and LaPrelle as far as construction procurement methods and a couple other small items. So I'd say tomorrow, there's the potential to be done by noon for sure, I think. But so with that, that's all the agenda for the commission today.
Turn it over to select water.
New motion.
I don't think do we need an emotion to adjourn?
I move to
So-
adjourn.
Do we have a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. I'm just gonna make a motion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we'd welcome you to stay if you'd like, or however you'd like to proceed. Let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll be back to continue our Select Water Committee meeting.
I just don't be ready. It's in the morning.
It's hard to tell. It just depends how quickly we run through those.
Just need to be ready.
Yeah, I just say
Yeah.
be available at 8:30 on, but I mean,
Maybe
we're not gonna get there before 9. I think we could be done with the entire agenda by.
Maybe I should stay.
Get over there. It's on the downbeat side all the time. No, good. Yeah. I was down and you were. That's not great. Yeah. I say it was early. Congratulations. And I'm going to try to run and run. So, that's good. Good job. Good job. And for all
All right, let's get back to work, everyone. I don't think that that was a motion, so we'll off to work we'll go. Thank you to the subcommittee and Vice Chairman Summers who headed that to take on temporary water use agreements and water exchange amendments. So we'll start out with 24 LSO 0213, and I'll turn that over to you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And I thought I'd just give everybody a little reminder of why we're working on these. And so as we look at conditions, particularly in the Colorado River, and as we get near potential curtailments, there's going to be more and more need to be able to move water around through leasing and a variety of things. I personally don't want to see the buy and dry scenario. So I think some of these other tools we have, like temporary use agreements and exchange agreements, can aid both industry and municipalities as shortages may near, while still allowing agriculture to survive and hopefully still thrive. And so the reason we wanted to look at these two, and it started out just with the temporary water use agreements, but I actually wanted to bring in the exchange agreement as well, was to make sure, and I think Aaron Reichel said it well, is do these tools have clarity and certainty? And those are the kind of the words I wrote down. And so part of the subcommittee, Aaron Reichel was on that as well. Jen Lamb had one of her folks there. We had other folks on there. Larry was on there. I was on there. I think you were there for a while, weren't you? Or not for a while. And so we'll start out with 0213. And I'm going to turn it over to David, and then Chris Brown. I think if you'd come up, we worked closely with the state engineer's office and the AG's office to try to get the wording right. And then we had, rather than go through another subcommittee meeting, the state engineer's office and Chris Brown brought some amendments that they want to consider. And so you'll see our amendments to law, and then you'll see attached amendments that are some amendments to be considered from the state engineer's office. So I think, David, I'll just turn it over to you and then turn it back to the chairwoman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office. First review 24 LSO 213 working draft 0.5. Couple of things just to note from the outset. There is just a staff comment at the front of the bill noting that the changes that you see, that the bill, first of all, it includes the entirety of the statute just for your committee's reference. So any final version, anything that's not changed is going to be taken out. So the final version of the bill will be significantly smaller than you see here, just so that there's no surprise during session when it's half the bill that you currently see. And I would also note specifically with the section headers, LSO convention, we don't typically have stricken or added language in those. So that will be removed in the final version as well. And you'll just see, so you won't see the striking there on lines 2 and 3, for example, on page 2 in the final version of the bill. That said, turning to page 2 of the bill, you'll see some of the changes made there. This is to the temporary water use statutes. And the first thing you'll see is that change to the section heading there where it strikes for highway or railroad roadbed construction or repair. The reason for that is really to provide clarity or to that this section is broader than just limited to temporary water rights for highway or railroad roadbed construction. And so it just strikes that language. Then on on line 10, it changes the length of time the person can acquire a temporary water right from 2 to 5 years, and adds language there that they can acquire that right for temporary beneficial purposes. It then strikes the remainder of the language currently in statute, which references highway construction repair obligations that the public highway construction repair contracts and things of that nature with the State Department have. As the working group kind of determined that was all a little extraneous. And so it strikes all of that language that you see there. And then on page 2, we get some new language on lines 3 through 5, where upon request, the state engineer in his discretion may renew a temporary transfer for successive periods not to exceed 5 years each. Then on page 5 is the next change that we'll see. Lines 9 through 12, it's just, again, making the same change to the section header, removing the for highway or railroad construction repair language. And then on lines 14 through 18, this is a substantive change. Current statute has language in there that prevents or would allow the owner of any permanent water right, whether it's junior or senior in priority, that if that person would be injured, that they're not allowed, that someone who wants to have a temporary water right basically loses that right, or if there's someone who would be harmed, whether they're junior or senior in priority. This changes that to just the person who is senior in priority. And so you see the stricken whether prior or subsequent to just which is senior, and then on line 17 to satisfy the senior right in full. On page 6, then, again, same change to the section header that we've seen previously. And then I did want to walk through what the proposed amendments do, which the committee should have there in the section materials, or the materials provided for this meeting. And those just make a change on page 3. Essentially, what the changes in that amendment do is remove all the language from lines 2 through 5 and replace it. So everything that you see on lines 2 through 5 would be gone and replaced with both paragraphs there that are in red on the amendment, providing that the state engineer shall not approve a temporary transfer if it injuriously affects the rights of other appropriators, or in the opinion of the state engineer, it is too difficult to administer prior to the expiration of a temporary transfer. And upon the applicant's request, the state engineer may, in his discretion, renew temporary transfers for successive periods with no successive period to exceed 5 years. And with that, I'd stand for any questions on the bill.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, just one thing, and I think, Chris Brown would have the details, but really this statute, when it was originally written, was written for highways. And that's why it, and I think he has that history if you want to know why that existed the way it did. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out.
Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just one quick clarification question for me. It says on the amendment there, line 6, it says line 7, in the opinion of the state engineer, is too difficult to administer. Could you just kind of give me an understanding of what that would look like? I mean, what would cause that kind of some verbiage to be in there, and what would that look like? Too difficult to administer?
Welcome, Mr. Brown, and go ahead.
Madam Chair, excellent question. And the perfect person to answer that question, I think, is online. The state engineer had a board of control meeting in Cheyenne this morning. So I hope, and I believe he's on virtually. He might be the best one to take the first crack at that answer, considering it's his folks that actually make those decisions.
I see him online. Can you hear us, Engineer Gephardt? And do you have an answer to that question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you. So I'm going to echo, and I apologize if it's to answer the question. Some of the issues that we would look at in that circumstance would be that the amount of manpower necessary to administer something that would create a lot of issues, could be pretty substantial, if not impossible to administer. I think if we're looking at a temporary water use agreement and you have to shepherd it over many miles, over many head gates, that becomes very problematic. The intent of the temporary water use agreements is to be a quick, easy change that can be administered quickly. And so we suggested that language be added to give us the ability to analyze that at the front, and then to deny it if we couldn't administer it and it was going to make it impossible to use.
Answer your question, or do you have a follow-up? All right.
Madam
Next-
Chairman,
Yes, Senator Guru had his hand up for a while, so I'll go to
I
him.
couldn't see it.
I see that, and then we'll go to you next. Go ahead, Senator Guru.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman, I guess, and I don't know who this question best answers this question. Maybe the speaker, maybe Director Gephardt too. I guess I have a little bit of a concern that we're, with the 5-year temporary permit. I get all that, but now the 5-year permit can be reapplied for, and then we set up a scenario where we're just reapproving the same 5-year temporary permit over and over again. And in a de facto way, we've granted a long-term water right, and under the guise of a temporary permit. Help me out with that. What's I know we're not granting a vested right, but someone help me out with that a little bit. I just a little bit concerned about that backdoor thing. Anybody help me?
Okay, Mr. Vice Chairman, I think you have an answer for us.
Madam Chairman, I'll start and then I'll let Director Gephardt take over. So currently it's 2 years and you can renew it. And there are temporary use permits out there, to my understanding, that have been renewed for a long time, over and over and over. So I don't think we didn't want to change what, and change actually what can currently be done. We wanted to give the state engineer the ability, clearly in statute, to have the authority to look at each individual application and to decide whether that was appropriate or not appropriate. That's my recollection, but I'll let Director Gephardt finish it up.
Madam Chair, thank
Right,
you.
we'll go back to you. Yep,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
go ahead.
So I think the important thing to remember is the temporary purpose that we're transferring this to. And one of the discussions that we've had is because it's a temporary purpose, and a lot of the reasons we're seeing these is for the what if. And they're not being exercised every year, but they are a backstop that if say administration or curtailment was the reason they wanted this temporary water use agreement, they may just sit on this and not exercise it for a period of time because it's a temporary purpose. But once that triggers, then that's when they would use it, and they may only use it once every 10 years. So I think the temporary purpose gets to the question that Senator Guru is asking. Does that help, Senator Guru?
Madam Chair, if it's follow-up. So between,
Go ahead.
thank you, Madam Chairman. Okay, so the language in the amendment about the state engineer, that helps me in one level. Now, then what I heard the speaker say, that we're already doing that with 2-year permits, but I shouldn't be too concerned about it, because what you're saying is people get this temporary right, don't always use it automatically. It's just use it as a just in case scenario should the need arise. Have I got that right?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
Senator Groove, that is correct. And one of the things, even as we continue to renew these things, we look at them every time. And if they look to be more of a permanent use, permanent change, then we will stop the temporary water use agreement and suggest they go through another avenue to change it more permanently than to suit what they're using it for. But if if it's still that temporary nature and they're only using it under certain circumstances, that's when we would continue and renew that. So we do analyze that for a permanent change every time we relook at these.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And part of the reason this language was in there is it was a little ambiguous, really, whether they had or didn't have the authority to do that prior to now. So this was clearly giving the state engineer authority to say, no, that temporary use can't be renewed again.
All right, if we're good, we'll go on to Senator Hicks. We'll go to Hicks and then Ellis.
Yeah, Madam Chairman. So back to Representative Nyman's question, I do have some concerns with the language. It is too difficult to administer because that becomes subjective, and I understand limitations and stuff like that. So under that scenario, if it's too difficult to administer and somebody said, okay, I won't do a temporary, I'll do an exchange, which is a little more arduous process and arguably was set up to do that way. Is it still then going to be up to the state engineers to determine if it's too difficult to administer for an exchange? And my concern is that we've already run into this just recently is under the exchange statutes. There was some discussion that they're just too difficult to administer, so they weren't going to allow an exchange within the same river basin, but different tributaries. And so I am concerned about that language and how that would be utilized moving forward. But the question is if we're going to do it here, and then somebody says, well, fine, I'll just do an exchange. Well, it's already too difficult, so we're not going to allow the exchange either. So could you address my concerns, Brandon?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, yeah, I will try to. So one of the things that we see or that we're concerned about is particularly with temporary water use agreements. If these were attempted for an ag to an ag use, we find that very problematic. One is it's not a temporary use, and two is shepherding becomes very problematic. If the stream is not in regulation, how do we make sure that the other side, the receiving end of this, is going to get their water without us out there administering it? And so that's one of the issues or things that we think about. Can we even administer a situation like that? If we're not out on a call, then the question, then arguably we're not out administering it. We can't guarantee that receiving agreement, the receiving end would even get the water. So that's one of the issues we see in the temporary water use agreement. Does that help, Senator Hicks?
No.
But you're right. We do the analysis on an exchange concept. The exchange concept does get a little more scrutiny in the front end as we're looking at an application. So we do spend a little more time on the administration side of this. But remember, the idea of a temporary use agreement is to be an easy button, very quick, and a quick turnaround on our time. So the mental gymnastics of going into a temporary water use agreement so that it doesn't turn into an exchange agreement type of a process, we want to quickly be able to analyze it and say, I don't think this is going to work. Temporary water use agreement may not be your best thing. Perhaps an exchange would be a better avenue to look at, but understand that's going to take some more time and some more mental gymnastics. So that's part of the suggestion for including that in this in this temporary water use agreement language, but I understand your confusion because it is the same language as in the exchange agreement, but I think the analysis would be much more brief on the temporary water use agreement than it would be on an exchange.
So the analysis is different, but what I'm trying to get at is the outcome the same? So if I was to come in and say I was the Joint Powers Board that had a diversion on the Green River in Sweetwater County, and because they found a willing person and say on the main stem of the Little Snake at a much more favorable price under a temporary use agreement, and there was a determination made that it's just too difficult to administer, does that then spill over and then bias if they said, well, we'll do an exchange rather than a temporary use because there's already been a determination that it's too difficult to administer?
Right, did you have an answer for that or?
Can I phone a friend and Chris Brown on that?
Well, I was going to ask you if you'd like to phone a friend and he's right here before us. So if you'd like to take that one, go ahead.
So, Madam Chair, and I'll do my best. And I think when I listen to the question, part of my mind immediately goes to my experience that you never get a water right hypothetical that actually considers everything. Right. And whether or not any sort of transfer change, be it temporary or through an exchange, you're going to have to know all the facts. And it could be true that something wouldn't be administratable under a temporary water use agreement or under an exchange. And it's just going to depend on the facts. I think the state engineer and I spoke with and collected the input from the superintendents and talking about the actual implementation of temporary water use agreements in their divisions. And I think one of the concerns we heard is that if this, because, you know, as Mr. Reichel identified, we're looking for something with a little more clarity, a little more certainty so that we can rely on those into the future. And if that promotes additional temporary water use agreements, that's just going to create additional complexity in the system. It's going to have to be something else to take into consideration. And so the request was to ask for this piece in here so that could be part of the consideration in the event that it is too difficult to administer. So as a hypothetical, if you had a 2 right under a temporary water use agreement above in the upper North Platte and the temporary use is in the lower North Platte, it probably will not matter one little bit. If it's a temporary water use agreement and exchange, you're not going to be able to administer that through the federal system to make that work. Likely is my best guess. And it's going to depend on the system you're in. We have systems that are completely appropriated with many head gates where you're going to have to shuttle water past those head gates. How much water are we talking about? Is it enough that I can even measure? How many head gates do I have to get it past?
Could he speak into the microphone? When he turns his head, I can't hear him.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
How much water do you have to get past? And so my only point, Senator Hicks, is that it is going to require looking at the individual facts and circumstances of each particular case. But as the state engineer mentioned, the temporary water use agreements, because they are of a temporary nature, and we have things in the statute like an assumption with regard to return flows, and that's the only place that that assumption is supposed to apply, it is a more abbreviated review. And so I think the caution there is to take a look, see if you're going to have the injury, see if you're going to be able to actually administer this in relation to the other water rights and make a decision about whether or not it can be administered. With regard to an exchange, it requires a lot more information. It requires the mapping. It requires identification of all of the intervening water rights. It requires the petitioner to identify a whole bunch more information. And with that additional information, then I think it is possible, given the right factual circumstance, that you could potentially, with that additional information, that additional scrutiny, find it to be administratable under an exchange when it might not be under a temporary water use analysis. I think hypothetically that is definitely possible.
Madam Chairman, that's the answer I was looking for.
All right, then we'll go to.
You may end up with a different result using a different tool. And it wasn't prejudiced by a determination that it was not administrable under a temporary water use to make sure that option, because of the diligence and the additional information, did not already lead you to a foregone conclusion that you couldn't administer it. So I think that helps.
Okay, we have some other thoughts on that when we get to working the bill. I think we might address the amendment because it's not even a part of the bill yet. Did you have anything further?
No, when we get to the amendment, I've got a proposed amendment to the amendment.
Okay, that sounds good. Senator Ellis is next and then Senator Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure I'm new to this committee, and when I read the bill, it's pretty clear to me that this is a temporary use for highway construction and for railroads. So I want to make sure I really understand what's covered when we're talking about temporary beneficial use versus something that's more permanent. And so then maybe that's a question that leads into, is this currently being utilized? Like, why are we changing this whole program for these temporary uses that apply to just road construction and transportation? Why didn't we just create a new temporary use section within the water title that talked about what we're really getting after? So maybe this is underutilized. So just some discussion about that. And then along the lines of everyone else, I just have concerns about, in the opinion of the state engineer, it's too difficult to administer. I'm wondering if Senator Hicks alluded to this, but maybe it's a little more prescriptive if the cost of administering exceeds a certain threshold or something, but that gives the applicant some assurance that this isn't just I didn't like the tie you wore today, so no, and it's too difficult to administer. Just something a little more concrete. Same with the language about in his discretion. I think there's a different way to tackle the concept by allowing the applicant to have one additional 5-year period for which they apply, but not just say, well, it's up to the discretion of the state engineer. So I know I kind of threw a lot at you, but those are the questions I have.
Right. Who would like to take that? Okay. And go ahead.
Chairman, thank you. So why are we just, the question on this, was this strictly highway construction? No, it wasn't. If you go on the lines if you go down to line 13 on the crossed out part on page 2, you will see the words or other temporary purposes. And so that has been used to basically create a whole bunch of temporary use permits out there in the world of, and so that's why we wanted to kind of get it. This historically was done for highways, but they left that in there and it became used for other things. And we wanted to bring the statute back to where everybody realized it was for everything, because when you read it, you don't really realize it was larger than. And so your other questions, I'll let somebody else take a run at.
Right. Who would like to take that, in the room or online?
So, Madam Chair, I'll take a crack unless the state engineer wants to try first.
Go ahead, Chris. I'll add if I need to.
Go ahead.
So, Madam Chair and Senator Ellis, so I understood your question about the second part is try to have something a little more objective with regard to, so take it a little bit more out of his discretion, give some kind of objective benchmarks or reasons why he could deny or find that it's not administratable. I guess the first thing I'll say to that is that we pulled this language directly from the same kind of concept in the exchange statute. And I think there's other places where we rely on the discretion of the water administrators to make a determination about whether or not something like this is administratable. I would, at least as I'm sitting here right now, have difficulty divining all of the circumstances that may make it unadministratable. And I think cost is only one, and it's not really even cost. I think it's really the ability of the limited number of hydrographer commissioners we have throughout the state in certain areas to actually go shepherd this water, if shepherding is even required. I mean, I think there are a lot of existing temporary water use agreements where you don't really have to shepherd it. The point of diversion of the temporary use is close enough to the existing that you don't have that problem. But I think there are a whole lot of other circumstances that would make the proposal unadministratable other than just cost. So you would have to, I think, we would have to think about what are those to come up with a complete list that might be able to identify what all those circumstances are. The ones that at least I have had conversations with some of the superintendents about, I can't think of one as I'm sitting here. It was a personnel issue. It was a water rights issue. It was the particular system that it's in having. So for example, you might have a senior right that wants to engage in a temporary water use agreement to provide it to a junior right, but the system you're in, there's no way that water is going to get to wherever that temporary use is. So it's just a matter of the water is never going to get there. I can't administer this just based on the hydrologic and legal circumstances of that system, as opposed to I don't have boots on the ground to go get it done. It just physically can't be accomplished. And I think if you get into a circumstance where you start stacking these on top of each other within a system, that in and of itself might make it too difficult to administer. Because if you have the water in a natural water course, you can only identify the different blocks of that water for so long. I mean, you can't do it for every molecule that's in there. So if I'm only talking about a temporary water use agreement that is half a CFS and a system that carries 40 CFS, it's going to be very difficult to pull that out in a system that's highly regulated. So a very long answer to your question. I think it's a whole lot more than just issues associated with cost, but it's going to bring in the facts and circumstances of each particular request for these temporary agreements.
Follow up. Sorry about the feedback there. So I still would like just a little discussion on what temporary uses are actually, this is what we're seeing in Wyoming already. And I think your points are well taken about the too difficult, but it's just so subjective, right? Like when we're talking about if you were first in line and you've got all these, people who are boots on the ground able to do it, great. But then, we run out of resources later and somebody makes an application and we say, sorry, we're too busy. I mean, it's a fairness question. And so I feel real uneasy about that. And I appreciate that we're borrowing language from other parts of the water statute. But, when I've done a cursory look at this, you can tell that some of these statutes were written a long time ago. And maybe this is the second part of my question. Is this a decision by the state engineer? This is too difficult to administer. Is it contemplated that the person who was denied, their application, that they could challenge it under the APA? I just want to make sure I understand how that works too. Thank you.
Ed.
So, Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, and just going off memory with regard to these particular statutes, and you are absolutely right. Many of these statutes, portions of them, or even all of them in some instances, were drafted as far back as 1890. And a lot of the discretion it's built into many of these statutes, both with regard to the state engineer and the Board of Control, flow from the constitutional provisions that give the state engineer the general supervision of the waters of the state. But the general concept being that you put these experts with regard to water administration in charge, you're going to rely on their discretion to make the best decisions with regard to this water use. So a lot of those statutes flowed from the concept that was built into the Constitution about putting water professionals and not lawyers in charge of water administration, like Colorado does, for example. The second piece, you will find many of the statutes that will have different mechanisms for appeal. For these two, so you have some statutes where an appeal can go, if a hydrographer makes a decision, goes to the superintendent, goes to the state engineer, goes to the district court. You have some set up where the state engineer makes a decision, the appeal goes to the Board of Control, which the state engineer is president of. So that's always interesting. But for these two particular statutes, I believe the course of appeal is likely under the APA, under arbitrary and capricious abuse of discretion, the typical APA appeal, or somebody being injured by agency action or inaction.
I'm gonna try to get us back on track a little. I think Senator Ellis also wanted to know kind of what the temporary uses
Oh.
we're seeing in the state are. And then after that, I'd like to keep us to the bill. And then if we decide we want to move the amendment, we can discuss the amendment after that. But let's look at the bill for now, and that might keep us back on track to see if you know what we want to do with the amendment. So if you could answer that part of the question for her, I think that might be great.
Madam Chair, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I forgot that piece. And I know the state engineer's office put together a list. If Brandon has that available, I think he could answer that. I don't have it with me.
Madam
Go
Chair, I
ahead.
don't have that list with me, but some examples of some of the temporary water use agreements we see. The extraction industry will enter into temporary water use agreements with a local water right holder to use that water for a short period of time for their production and drilling purposes. We do see quite a few of them for road construction. We see some of these used for municipalities to go out and get additional sources under times of administration or a compact call or a decree call or something like that. So those are three examples of what we see these for currently. Industry will use them occasionally for the same purpose. If there's a call on the river and their junior water right is going to be called off, they will go get in temporary water use agreement with somebody to maintain their system.
Right, we've got questions stacking up. We'll first go to Larson, then we'll go to Kolb, then Craigo. Go ahead, Senator Larson.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. My question would be, was there any consideration about maybe rewording the titles of each of those to kind of reference more that it's a temporary use agreement? I don't know how that would go about, but I think that would sure help others know what this is really for. It isn't like you're getting temporary water right. That's my thoughts.
Right, either David or Chris. Do you want to address that?
Madam Chair, I'll take a crack at it. Representative Larson, Senator Larson now, sorry. There was discussion, and I think primarily beginning with Senator Hicks at least, is just to remove kind of the clutter. Remove some of the descriptors because as the speaker mentioned, we're finding other temporary purposes that these are appropriate for. I don't know that we had any additional discussion to talk about agreement. If you read the actual language in the statute, you do acquire a temporary right. It stems from an agreement between the parties, but you do acquire that right under this statute to use that water pursuant to the agreement you have with somebody. But I don't believe the working group at least had any discussion about trying to tailor the titles any more than removing the clutter.
Right, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, at your discretion, I would like to know if we should talk about the amendment, continue, or we should just move on to the bill.
Senator Kolb, I think we'd like to address the bill first, and then we'll go to the amendment when we move it.
Well, then, at your discretion, I like to use that word. I will not have any questions at this time.
Okay, all right, Representative Craigo.
Madam Chairman, I'm going to move the bill. And then if you want to have a discussion on it.
Well, let's finish up our questions and then we'll move the bill. Go ahead, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a question. It might be for Mr. Brown or Mr. Hopkinson. So on page 3, and this is kind of a technical question, line 2, and I know there's an amendment to address some of this language, but at line 2, it talks about any temporary transfer shall only be allowed if no other appropriator is injured thereby. That would be prior or subsequent. And so I'm just questioning whether that creates some sort of internal conflict within the bill draft itself, because if we go to page 5, we start talking about calls upon water in section 111. And we're amending the statute to say only senior rights can effectuate a call. And so it seems to me we either need to go back and fix that language on page 3 and say, you're not going to grant the temporary permit only if it affects, only if it has an effect on prior appropriators, not subsequent. So any comments or thoughts on that would be helpful for me to get that. And there might be something I don't understand. Obviously, you guys are the experts, so thank you.
Want me to try that?
Go ahead, either one of you.
Madam Chair, appreciate the question. I guess my response to that is, in any of the statutes that we have that allow for some sort of adjustment change to the underlying right, they all have a requirement to assess for injury. So at the front end, before it can be granted, some assessment has to be made with regard to injury to any other water rights, either senior or junior, to the right that's wanting to change in some way. So I think that provision that you pointed out is absolutely consistent with every other piece of legislation we have that deals with any sort of change. So on the back end, the way that after it gets into place, the way it's currently written, it would allow almost an automatic shutting off of the temporary transfer. And then you have to prove on the back end whether it injures them, both senior and junior. The way the amendment is after it's granted, after an injury analysis is done, so you have to consider whether or not it hurts juniors before granting it. And it requires all the consumptive use or non-consumptive use be left in the stream as well. Only a senior under the proposed amendment will be allowed to turn it off. And I think that reflects most other or all other potential change statutes as well, is that only a senior to the right that's providing the water would be able to turn it off. But I think it's still appropriate to have the injury analysis on the front end as it relates to both junior and senior rights. So the only distinction would be if under this particular instance, the state engineer does an analysis with regard to injury on the front end, determines it's not going to injure anybody. The only person, the only type of right on the back end that could challenge it would be a senior user. But they are temporary in nature, wouldn't be there permanently in case any kind of actual injury actually exists against a junior as well.
Follow up.
Madam Chairman, follow up. So some of these other rights that we're evaluating, do any of those other rights or evaluations pertain to transferring your water rights, even temporarily, to someone else? And how exactly, I'm just thinking about other situations where that would be similar to this, where only the senior would have the right to shut you off. Some examples for us would be helpful, I think.
Ed.
So, Madam Chair, the only thing that's springing to my mind relates to permanent changes. And so you can, and this is one of the things, and I think Mr. Speaker identified this at the beginning, we're trying to avoid permanent changes with regard to irrigated agriculture. The valuable water rights are the early ones. The early ones are irrigated agriculture. Trying to avoid that to allow for these flexible temporary tools to be a little more certain to be used. So my brain is just going automatically to a permanent change. You have to go under Wyoming statute 41.3.104 that's got a laundry list of things the Board of Control has to take a look at with regard to injury to anybody. Either junior or senior water rights can only allow for the consumptive use portion of the right to be changed. And there's a whole bunch of other things identified in that statute. But once that right changes the place of use, so if you're changing it from one place to another place, it takes the priority date with it. And in that instance, only a senior right then in that system where it's newly located would be able to call it out. A junior appropriator in that instance would not, because that change takes the priority date with it.
Are you good? Okay, go ahead.
One of the other reasons, so we amended this, and you'll see this in the bill, and then the state engineer's office brought that change. One question most of us or some of us had was, and the reason that there is an amendment at all, I believe, is if you go on page 3, line 2, and you read any temporary transfer shall be allowed only if no other appropriator is injured. Well, what is the appropriator? Is that the water right being injured, or is that just the appropriator? Any appropriator might lose a little water because something was done. So we wanted to make it, at least I did, I wanted to make it clear it was that water right that was being injured, not the appropriator. And so I think that's why in the language, you'll see that it got a little more fine tuned by injuriously affects the rights of other appropriators, not just the appropriator. It might have been implicit in the other one, but it wasn't to me reading it. And I think that's one of the reasons they brought that piece of the language change. And I agree on the, the one question I would have, since we're asking questions, is I also had already boxed off in the opinion of the state engineer, it is too difficult to administer. I don't really understand the need of that when in a few lines down, it's in his discretion to renew or not renew. We give pretty much no limits on what his discretion can be. So why do we need that piece in there if it's within his discretion to issue or not issue? That's under the new language that,
Right, that's
in
the amendment.
in the
But maybe you could answer about what discretion he currently employs with regards to these temporary water use agreements already.
I guess I'm not fully tracking the question. I apologize.
Madam Chairman, I don't understand in the amendment why the line in the opinion of the state engineer, it is too difficult to administer, why that is needed. When you go down to the second piece of the amendment, you have the amendment there.
Yes, sir.
So you go down to the second piece of the amendment and it says, prior to the expiration of a temporary transfer and upon the applicant's request, the state engineer may, in his discretion, renew the temporary transfer, right?
Yes, sir.
So I guess that's just renew. So it's in his discretion to renew rather than in his discretion to put it in place. So maybe that's why.
So,
Right, we've taken some latitude on the amendment and we haven't even had public comment or moved the bill or anything yet. So I think we'll save that until we decide if we're moving the amendment or how we're gonna handle that. Is there any further discussion? Representative Conrad?
Madam Chair, thank you. Not a discussion, but if Mr. Brown could repeat that statute, it was 43 and I think you said 104.
Madam Chair, with regard to permanent changes, I
Yes.
believe it's 41.3.104.
41.3.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I do have a question, and that is on page 5, where we're taking out on line 14 and 15, whether priority or subsequent, and just excluding it to senior. I realize you're looking at that on the front end like you just talked about, but what practically could this look like to junior users? So basically, if someone it has a senior right and it transfers to a different use and it harms a junior water right holder, what is their recourse in that case?
So, Madam Chair, in just thinking about factually how that would progress, and this hasn't happened because we haven't changed this yet, so I'm trying to think of it. But I guess in my mind, a junior user who believes that they were injured by this temporary transfer that was allowed would make some sort of a request to the hydrographer commissioner to turn it off because they are being injured. That decision then is appealable under the statutes up through whatever process, and that particular process is typically to the superintendent, to the state engineer, and ultimately to the district courts. And so when it comes to a water regulation question, the process is very quick and it's built that way. It's not a contested case hearing. It is a very quick, and I think it's been a while since I looked at the policy of the state engineer's office, but I think within 2 days you get answers as that goes up generally, unless it's an incredibly complicated question. The appeal would then go from the hydrographer making the decision about whether or not to do anything to the superintendent, to the state engineer. Ultimately, under the Constitution, all of their decisions are appealable to the district courts.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I think this is a very substantive part of the bill, and I think it's a very important part of the bill, because in my opinion, it removes a conflict and gets back to the very purpose of prior appropriation. So even under a temporary use, it still carries a priority date. And I mean, that's really one of the pillars of water law is prior appropriation doctrine. And so even if that senior water right user now is able to utilize all that water, the juniors under prior appropriation doctrine don't get any. And so even under that temporary transfer, it still carries that priority date. And so for me, this removes that conflict that all of a sudden a junior can trump a senior. And so I think this is a very substantive, important piece, and I think it's consistent with our whole foundation of water law under prior appropriation. We shouldn't allow juniors to call out seniors. It is a change, and so I have no idea how that got in there in the first place, but I think this brings it back to a conforming doctrine of prior appropriation means what it says, instead of having that conflict with this one provision in water law.
Go ahead, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So along this same line and what the good senator's talking about, I mean, is there any historical reason why? I mean, I can conceptualize in my mind, but I'm just making it up, why I think the statute says what it says, right? Because there's an argument that if you're a new user and you're borrowing rights from somebody else, you are the junior water user, right? I mean, I can see that argument, and I'm assuming that's why the statute probably, which has been around for a very long time, is written the way it is. And I mean, I actually think we're not fixing a conflict. I think we're creating one. But that's just me, and I'm not a water expert, but I'm just curious, and so I'd love to know if there's any historical background on that you would know, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
So,
Ed.
Madam Chair, I think Mr. Speaker mentioned that the history behind the temporary water use agreement really started with the creation of the interstate highway system. And when they started building interstates through Wyoming, and so this statute isn't that old in relation to most water statutes. When they started building the interstate highway system, they found that they needed water for the construction process. But during that period in Wyoming's history, the ability to change a right didn't exist except for very limited circumstances. So 41.3.101 didn't exist at that time. There was no ability to make those changes. The ability to have some flexibility with water rights was much more limited. And so as they allowed this to happen, and I think, and this is just kind of reading some of the history and reading a little bit between the lines, because we all know Wyoming's legislative history isn't what it might be in order to divine the intent with regard to some of this. But I believe it was for the purpose, including the junior user in that. It was a period of time in our history where changes generally weren't allowed. So this was something really new. And it's equally important under the doctrine of appropriation that junior users come to the system and take it as they find it. And senior users can't change that system to the detriment of the junior outside of the parameters of their water rights. So I think it's a recognition of that fact as well. Couple that with, this isn't noticed as far as these being issued. And so the opportunity for a junior to be plugged into a permanent change, for example, where you've got to be noticed if you're an intervening right, for example, it's a little bit different. And so I think this just was an extra protection on the back end in the event that the state engineer analysis didn't catch a potential injury. So you're right, there is as much protection under the priority system for junior users as there is senior users. The senior users can't do whatever they want to the detriment of the junior.
Right. If the committee is done with questions and of our staff and of the state engineer's office, I think we'll take public comment on each of these bills separately. And then if the good vice chairman wants to move the bill, we certainly can. Is there any public comments on our first working draft 24 LSO 213. Public comment, seeing none. Public comment is closed. Back to the committee.
Madam Chairman, I would like to move 24 LSO 0213.
All right, the bill is moved by Summers, seconded by Hicks. And now we will go to amendments. Are there any proposed amendments to the bill?
So, Madam Chairman, I'm going to move the amendment and we can work on it or we can kill it. And I think others may have others, but I'll do the one that's in your packet, the one that's on page 3, lines 2, strike existing language entirely. Page 3, lines 3, strike existing language. Delete all new language and insert the state engineer shall not approve a temporary transfer if it is injuriously affects the rights of other appropriators, or in the opinion of the state engineer, it is too difficult to administer. And then on page 3, lines 4 and 5, delete entirely and insert prior to the expiration of a temporary transfer and upon the applicant's request, the state engineer may in his discretion renew temporary transfers for successive periods with no successive period to exceed 5 years. So I'll move that amendment.
All right. It's been moved by Summers, seconded by Hicks. Discussion on the amendment, and I'm assuming staff has that amendment in front of them, so we're good to go there. All right, discussion on the amendment. Representative Yin.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I actually agree with you. I don't think this top language is really necessary at all because we do give the engineer discretion. I think if we do want to adopt this, what I would ask the committee is that we put something where we require rules to be promulgated to define what it's too difficult to administer, because I think Senator Ellis's point where it is too vague is appropriate, and that at the very least, if we're not going to define it in statute, we should at least make rules to get it defined. But I will probably vote against the amendment in total.
Okay. Further, Senator Culp.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think the first proposed amendment, when we start getting into at the discretion of the state engineer, while I like our state engineer, I don't know what the next one's going to be like. So I think at the very least, they have to provide a written explanation on the reason for, say, the rejection of issuance of a temporary water use permit. They need to tell the applicant why. It can't just be an opinion. I think it has to have a written explanation to it. So that would be my, I guess, comment on that. Then my second comment is, I think that if the applicant would if they need to pay for the extra cost for administering a temporary water use permit because it's onerous or whatever be the case, I think that opportunity should be afforded to the applicant to pay if they so choose. So I think the state engineer should offer a couple different things. First, on rejection, a written comment, a written statement why, and secondarily on the cost of said administration. If the applicant wishes to pay for it, I don't know why they wouldn't be able to do such a thing. I mean, barring the fact that it may be in a different, in a place where it's impossible to do. But I think that we need to afford the applicant any opportunity we can to seek this permit, because it maybe they're okay with paying the extra cost. I don't know. But I think it's certainly a question I'd like to ask or discuss. Does that sound like something that we'd be willing to do as a committee? And anyway, that's my thought, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. Mr. Brown, I do have a question for you. Is a rejection letter something that the office procedure uses right now when they have a rejection, or something is up to the discretion of the state engineer?
Madam Chair, and the state engineer might have this information more at his fingertips, but in my experience, if a temporary water use agreement request is rejected, a written explanation for that rejection is provided.
Okay.
Madam
Vice
Chair, that is
Chairman
correct.
Summers. Okay, thank you.
So, Madam Chairman, I'm gonna propose an amendment to the amendment. And that is on that page 3, line 3, in that proposed amendment, I would like to, after appropriators, I would like to strike, or in the opinion of the state engineer, it is too difficult to administer. So I just want to get rid of that whole line. So that would be my amendment to the amendment.
Second.
All right, it's moved by Summers, seconded by Kolb. Does everybody understand the friendly amendment to the amendment? And the first second to the amendment is okay with that, right? Which
Yes.
was Hicks.
Yes.
Okay, all right, so we're good to go. Does everybody understand what the amendment currently is, or do you need us to go over it? Everyone understands? Is there any further discussion? Representative Yin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think the one thing I would want to make sure that I'm reading the amendment right is that the other substantive change is that it only allows one successive 5-year period and not unlimited successive 5-year period, which is what's in the bill.
Madam Chairman, I couldn't understand you. It allows more than one successive 5-year period, with no successive period to exceed 5 years.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman. That helps clarify that I read it wrong. So I
All
appreciate the
right, are you
clarification.
okay then? Okay. All right, any further discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of the amendment as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The amendment has passed. We are back on the bill. Is there any further amendments?
Call for the question.
Question having been called, all those in favor of sponsor, I guess we'll need a roll call vote.
Roll call.
On the bill. So as amended, 24 LSO 213, we would need a roll call vote. Donna, please call the roll.
There were nobody else wanted to make an amendment.
I haven't heard of one.
So,
Did anyone else have an amendment?
Madam Chairman,
Go ahead.
I had a proposed one. Adding deleted that second part of the run-on sentence.
Okay,
It's, Representative Summers' amendment to delete that language, so it's no longer necessary.
okay, last chance if you have anything before we call the roll. Seeing none, please call the roll.
This is roll call on 24 LSO 213 version 5. Senator Ellis. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Kolb.
Aye.
Senator Larson. Representative Conrad. Representative Crago. Representative Larson. Let's see. Is
Representative Larson, he's excused. I'm sorry. I was looking at Dan. And we're talking JT, right?
Right, that's right.
Larson,
Representative Larson,
JT.
JT.
He is
Yes.
excused.
Representative Nyman. Representative Yin. Vice Chairman Summers.
Aye.
Chairman Steinmetz.
No.
Chairman Steinmetz, we have 7 aye, 4 no, and 1 excused.
Thank you, Donna. And so now we're back on to our bill discussions of 24 LSO 333 water exchange amendments. Vice Chairman Summers, if you would like to take us through this one, and David, take her away.
Madam Chairman, I think I'll just turn it over to David to go over it, but basically, since we were looking at the temporary use one, we wanted to look at the water exchange one. We didn't have much change to it really. And I'll just turn it over to David.
Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, walking through 24 LSO 333, working draft 0.4. Similar to the previous bill, this one includes the entirety of the statute. So I would just note that anything that isn't actually changed in the final version will be removed. On page 3, there is some bolded language there. This language was discussed during the working group, but at that time there was no consensus. And that's noted in the staff comment, and that the language that we see there that's in bold is addressed in the amendment, but in the draft itself, that is not changed. I just wanted to highlight that for the committee. So the first change as drafted that we'll see is on page 4 at lines 25 through 27. It adds language into the water exchange statute that provides that no loss, abandonment, or impairment of water rights shall occur or attach as a result of an exchange under this section. And that is the only change as drafted. Going over to the amendments.
Vice Chairman Summers.
Madam Chairman, on that piece, it has to do with the 5-year thing, whether if you don't use it for 5 years, you lose it. It's been the assumption that you don't lose it under an exchange. I think Chris Brown can explain that, but we wanted to make it very clear in here that that was the case.
Madam Chair, Mr. Speaker, absolutely. The state engineer's office has recently dealt with a few of these where some of the two rights, which have been in these examples, irrigated agriculture, were concerned that the existing language is a little bit fuzzy. And they wanted something a little bit more clear to assure that they wouldn't be at risk of abandonment if the water rights were used under an exchange for a different use.
All right, so are there any further questions on the bill for David or Chris or the state engineer? Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
So in providing clarity, Madam Chair, does this additional language affirm how courts or adjudicative bodies have been interpreting it, or is it reverse how those bodies have interpreted the language?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I am aware of no body that has interpreted that.
Okay, does that Representative Conrad?
Chair, thank you. Question to Mr. Brown, page 5, line 9. Does $50 cover your costs?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, the state engineer is probably better equipped to answer that
Question to the engineer, state engineer.
Madam Chair,
Can you answer that first? Did you hear the question?
I can. I don't know that we've ever done an analysis. These things can take significant amounts of time. But I also factor in the idea that if we're paying for time, this is what we do. So I don't know that we should be recompensated for additional time. So I think the idea was probably to cover costs of mailings and notices and things like that. I don't have a significant concern with the cost as part of doing our everyday duties.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Conrad.
Just to follow up, based on the age of these bills, I mean, in 1970, $50 is probably a lot, but at some point we've got to make an adjustment here, don't we? You would agree.
Would you agree with that, Mr. State Engineer?
Madam Chair, I do think that we do spend more money than the $50 on this. It's how this board would like to look at that, I would think.
All right, thank you for that. Any further questions? Any further comments from the state engineer's office or staff?
The amendment.
Would you like to go over the amendment for us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in looking at the amendment, the first change is on page 2, line 17, where it would be striking the language from another source. This section, that I think amendment comes from some discussion at the working group meeting. Wondering what exactly that language means. What does it mean that it has to come from another source, and what that's referencing? So that's the reason I think for just striking that language and getting rid of it. And I would defer to the state engineer's office on the practicalities of that implication. But then looking at page 3, line 17, after, and here we're in that bolded language, after if, it would strike the remainder of line 17. Line 18 strikes adversely affects. And then you insert the rights of, and then after other appropriators, insert will be injuriously affected thereby. So it essentially reads, the state engineer shall not issue an exchange order if the rights of other appropriators will be injuriously affected thereby. Then on page 4, line 25. It would delete that new language, the no loss, abandonment, or, and it would delete the rest of that entirely and insert a no loss, abandonment, or impairment of any water rights involved in the exchange shall occur or attach as a result of the exchange, except as provided in the order allowing the exchange. So essentially that language in the amendment from lines 11 through 15 would replace the language that's in the bill draft as drafted.
Questions on the amendment?
Madam Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Matt, I'd like to hear Chris Brown's explanation of this whole amendment, particularly the last piece, because I don't know why you changed what you did. So,
Madam Chair, Mr. Speaker, you want me to start at the top? So the first amendment is to strike from another source. We've had in dealing with some of the exchange, and when I say we, the state engineer's office, especially as it relates to storage water. And if you read the current state engineer's office rules, the easiest way to effectuate an exchange is to latch onto some storage water. And oftentimes, if you're identifying the source of supply as the stream, so the North Platte River or the Green River as the stream, that could be interpreted to mean I've got to go to a different stream. And in the opinion and in the practice of the state engineer's office, that simply doesn't happen. I mean, the point is trying to find a source, being the water right, that has water available to it to supply water to a right that does not. That's the whole point of the exchange. And we've had applicants who have felt that ambiguity perhaps lends some chink in the armor of their exchange. And so our proposal, the state engineer's office proposal, is simply to strike that so that an exchange can happen so long as the right that it's coming from has water available to it to provide for the exchange. And I think, as Mr. Speaker mentioned at the outset, a lot of these changes are really driven by our current experience on the Green River Basin. And we would anticipate leveraging every opportunity we have to run exchanges out of Fontenelle Reservoir to the extent the Water Development Commission has an ownership account there. And we wouldn't want to preclude that opportunity because we're trading with other rights on the Green River. And so that was why the state engineer's office suggests that deletion. The next proposal, and I must have gotten the wrong version because my version that tracks this is not matching up. So we strike if so the rights of other appropriators. So just inserting the rights of, I think, gets to Mr. Speaker's concern that just identifying appropriators could potentially open up to any potential injury the appropriator might suffer, as opposed to zeroing in and focusing on rights, the water rights of that appropriator that might be injured, which, by the way, is fully consistent with how the Wyoming Supreme Court has interpreted injury to other appropriators will be injuriously affected by thereby. I don't know that I need to describe that any further. The last edit, no loss, abandonment, or impairment of any water rights involved in the exchange shall occur or attach as a result of the exchange. That language is simply to clean it up. I think what the previous language wasn't specific enough to the exchange statute. We just talked about changes generally. So we tried to make the language just specific to the exchange because I'm talking about the exchange statute. That last piece, and I would invite the state engineer to elaborate on this, was in direct kind of response. Number one, it's the language that's already contained in the temporary water use agreement statute. So we kind of pulled that over. It's the same kind of concept. But I think the state engineer mentioned earlier, what we're anticipating and what we're seeing, especially in the Green River Basin, is the opportunity for the junior users to get an exchange under a long-term sort of arrangement with the senior users, but only actually have the exchange operate in the years where it's necessary. So only in the event of a curtailment in the Colorado River Basin, the analogous thing in the North Platte would be an allocation year. So the state engineer wanted to put that in there because he was concerned, and I think the superintendent was concerned, that we'd have these long-term arrangements. And if you were just providing blanket exemption from abandonment, just being under the agreement would allow it to go fallow and not be used for that whole period of time and be protected. And so I think the concern and why the state engineer asked for that to be added in is that he would, I believe, in the orders require that so long as the exchange isn't in operation, the underlying water right must be used or wouldn't be protected from abandonment. That was the purpose of that suggestion.
Does everyone understand or have any questions? Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'm just looking at page 2 in your first suggested amendment on striking from another source. I think if you read that whole paragraph, and I know it's a lot, but I think it makes the sentence kind of fall apart of what the intent of this is. If you start on line 8 on page 2, it says any appropriator owning a valid water right, skip ahead, where the source of the appropriation is at times insufficient, more language, they may petition the state engineer for an order allowing for an exchange, again, skipping ahead, from another source. So like there's a lot of qualifying language in there, but that's the ultimate intent, is where the source is insufficient, they can get it from another source. So when we strike that from line 17, I don't think it attaches just from a different groundwater source. I think it makes the whole sentence, I think it's the whole purpose of the whole sentence. So I'm a little concerned about striking that. And so I'm wondering if that's where the difference in interpretation is someone's saying, oh, the groundwater from a different source, when it's really from another source applies to the whole purpose of the paragraph. Does that make sense?
Go ahead, Mr. Brown. And I see what Senator Ellis is saying as well, because it looks like you could add more to the same source, if that makes sense to you, but go ahead if you know the answer to that question.
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, the answer to that question is that is a very good point. And I think it could potentially create an internal conflict that I hadn't picked up on. I think the way the state engineer's office has been interpreting this is the word source to mean the water right under which the right is being satisfied, instead of the physical water body from which it's pulling water. And so our effort was simply to clarify that interpretation, not make it worse.
So any further questions on the amendment? I think that's something that we could possibly look at deleting from the amendment if we choose to move it. With that being said, I think we will take public comment now. If no one has any further questions, go ahead. We have a member of the public here. We're glad to have someone from the public here to comment on this important bill. So go right ahead. State your name and who, if you're with an organization, let us know. Thanks for being here today.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and committee members. I'm Aaron Reichel, VP of Technology with Genesis Alkali. a 27-year veteran of the drone industry and one of the current industry representatives on the recently legislated Wyoming Colorado River Advisory Committee. I want to offer support for the or 24 LSO 333 and the proposed amendments on behalf of the largest trona producer in North America. The Wyoming trona industry, all based in the Green River Basin, has revenue over $2 billion, but more importantly, has over 2,300 direct employees, a payroll of close to $400 million a year, and we pay local, state, and federal taxes and royalties close to $100 million a year. Fresh water is absolutely critical in the production of saleable products from trona. Essentially, all the water in the Green River and Little Snake drainages that is not subject to curtailment is held by agriculture. In the event of a curtailment, the trona industry and other industries and municipalities and junior agricultural water users, for that matter, will be dependent on the transfer of water from senior agricultural water rights holders for our viability. Clear and certain temporary water use and exchange statutes and regulations can provide the opportunity for non-permanent transfers of water from agriculture to trona, leaving the senior water rights on the agricultural land. Absent clarity in the temporary water use agreements and exchange mechanisms, a likely alternative is to pursue permanent transfers of water rights, often referred to as buy and dry. Buy and dry is not good for agriculture, not good for industry, and not good for Wyoming. Certainty is critical for our industry as we simply cannot risk finding out that water is not available when a curtailment happens, and then spend months sorting things out while our 2,300 employees go without jobs. Agriculture also needs certainty that their water rights will not be abandoned or impaired if they enter into a non-permanent transfer of water to a junior user. The proposed changes will help provide the clarity needed by industry, agriculture, and municipalities to confidently pursue these non-permanent transfers of water for potential curtailment backup. I really appreciate you considering these modifications, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, further public comment on this bill? Please state your name and if you're with an organization, and go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Water and Commissioners.
Is your microphone on?
I'll try
There you
again.
go. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Select Water and Commissioners. Jennifer Lamb. I work for the Nature Conservancy, but I'm also here as a representative of the state's Colorado River Advisory Committee, recently appointed. I'm really just here to say thank you for taking up the discussion about these two statutes and the potential changes to them. Aaron outlined well the concerns, and I am here to just underscore that the business of the committee and of the state and of this committee really is to develop some innovative approaches to keeping Wyoming water users using water and maintaining the activity of the state that really relies on water. I believe that the changes you're talking about in both these statutes are going to enable Wyoming to come up with the best solutions to this really tricky problem. And I know it's a big deal to look at changes to water law. It should be. These, I believe, are smart and are going to give more tools in our toolbox to set us up well for the future in this basin, and then potentially others. Who knows where the drought takes us in the future. So just thank you for the work you're doing and for diving into these excruciating details and for enabling us to participate in this process. Thanks.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. All right. Any further public comment? Anything online?
Engineer Gephardt has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, if I may, I would like to go back to the question involving the source in the amendment, if that's allowable. Look, thank you. I think Senator Ellis brought up a very good point, and I quickly looked at it, and the way I'm looking at this, an example could be that the reason for somebody's water right to be insufficient could be that the stream is under regulation. even under regulation, if they went through an exchange, they can have an exchange on the same water body with the senior right that could then satisfy their water. And the way I look at this, the first source that was mentioned, it talks about the source of the appropriation. So if you view that as a stream, the stream does not have enough water, then an exchange could be entered into. And I think by striking the from another source on line 17, I don't think changes that, but it does help provide clarity that it doesn't necessarily have to come from a different stream. It could come, the exchange could be done on the same stream with the water right on the same stream. Having said that, though, I think it would be important then to probably strike the from another source on line 20 as well. In that instance, you would only have the discussion of source one time in that paragraph. That's my comment.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have questions for the state engineer on that? And does everybody understand he would want to also have us look at striking from another source on line 20? So, all right, with that, I see any further public comment. Seeing none, public comment is closed. We're back to the committee. The bill has been moved by Hicks.
Second.
Seconded by Summers. Are there any amendments on the bill?
Yes.
Go ahead, Representative Conrad.
Madam Chair, if I can propose an amendment specifically as it relates to page 3 to replicate what we 24 LSO 0213, strike opinion of the state engineer.
Okay, just a minute. Tell us what line you're on.
I'm on page 3 of the current bill, line 19.
Okay,
Strike in the opinion of the state engineer be too difficult to administer, or would it? I'll leave it there.
all right. Do I have a second on that amendment?
Second.
Moved by Conrad, seconded by Ellis. Discussion on the amendment. Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
They have to speak against this amendment. Given the level of scrutiny that goes through these exchanges versus the temporary water use agreement, it's a much more protracted process, the analysis of its injury, a lot more due diligence is done. I think at some point in time, you do have to leave, because these exchanges are not for a 5-year period. They can be for very long durations of time. And so at some point in time, I think you have to leave at least some discretion with the state engineer to make a determination. Now, that being said, after a period of time, if circumstances change, they could refile that same petition for an exchange if circumstances change. Because of the level of analysis that the exchange goes through, I'm a little more comfortable with having some discretion of the state engineer to be able to make a determination that it's just not administrative.
All right, it looks like Senator Guru has his hand up online.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A question for the bringer of the amendment. I didn't quite hear it all. I want to make sure I have it. On line 19, you want to strike after the word would, comma, in the opinion of the state engineer be too difficult to administer, and the balance of that line did you want, or would be adverse to the public interest? Is that all the strike?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Yes, Senator Greer, would be, as you denoted, in the opinion of the state engineer, comma, be too difficult to administer. That's stricken, the amendment, within the amendment.
Madam Chair.
The balance would remain.
The balance would remain. Thank you.
Madam Chairman.
All right, Senator Hicks.
Would ask the state engineer because this is existing language. What we were doing before was we were bringing in new language, expression of the state. This is existing since this statute was promulgated. So I would ask the state engineer, have they ever denied one of these exchanges? And maybe if, Chris wants to opine on that too, but first I'd ask state engineer Gephardt.
Yes, go
If
ahead.
he's aware of any time that they rejected one of these because it was too difficult to administer.
Go ahead, Mr. Gephardt.
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, not having a long history, I don't know the answer to that, but I will offer. We are currently reviewing an exchange petition right now, and we have very in-depth conversations about this very particular thing is how could we administer this? And this is part of the reason we haven't issued this exchange that I'm talking about right now is because we haven't worked through whether this can be administered or not. And so there are many, many things that we continue to look into on that alone that has taken up a significant time in our analysis on this petition. And I don't know if Chris has more history on whether we denied them or not, but I do know that is something that is very well scrutinized.
All right. Are there any further questions? Would you like to go ahead and comment on that?
Madam Chair, just briefly. First, I'll say I'm not aware of any exchange petition that's been denied because of that issue, but these do typically involve quite a bit of back and forth between the state engineer's office and the petitioners, both the petitioner that wants the water and the petitioner that's providing the water. And I am aware of a number of instances where during those conversations, the administratability component was discussed and we'd advise the petitioner that it wouldn't be administratable. And so let's look for a different opportunity. So I am aware of those instances. Under these longer term types of arrangements, I can tell you the ones that I've worked on, the state engineer's office leans very heavily on the ability to make sure that they can be administered, get the water to where they want it to be. So I can tell you that it's been leaned on very heavily by that office.
Right. Are there any further questions or comments? All right, seeing none. Everyone understands what the amendment is. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
The amendment has failed. Division being called. If you are opposed, please raise your hand. Oh, I mean for, please raise your hand. Excuse me. For the amendment, opposed to the amendment, raise your hand. 6 against, 7. So the amendment has failed, as I said. We're back on the bill. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Madam Chairman, so I'm going to go to the proposed amendment from the state engineer's office, and I'm going to go down to line 11. And from there below is going to be my amendment. So page 4, lines 26 and 27, delete entirely and insert no loss, abandonment, or impairment of any water rights involved in the exchange shall occur or attach as a result of the exchange, except as provided in the order allowing the exchange. I felt like their explanation did better clarify that. And so that would be my amendment.
Moved by Summers, seconded by Ellis. Discussion on the amendment. Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Line 9, which is page 4, line 25. Also.
Correct. You're right.
All right, so that's a friendly amendment. So on your amendment, add line 9.
No, just a second, Madam Chairman.
Okay, go ahead.
Page 4, yeah, that's right. That's correct. Yep.
All right, is the second okay with that friendly amendment? I can't remember who it was. Okay. All right, any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment has passed. And Senator Guru had his hand up. Did you have a question, Senator Guru? Did I miss you? No, okay, thank
Just
you for
voting.
that.
Thank you.
All right.
Ma-
Okay, all right, Representative Conrad,
Madam Chair, I'd like to propose an amendment.
okay,
I'll try it this time. Page 5, line 9. Fee not to exceed $100 to be consistent with our previous proposal.
all right, is there a second on that amendment? Second on the amendment? Second, moved by Conrad, seconded by Ellis, discussion on the amendment. Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Madam Chairman, I don't deny that an increase is probably should occur, but I think increasing the fee will kill the bill on introduction, because there are folks that don't want to provide any fee increase. So I'm not for that. So I'm not going to be for this amendment.
All right, any, Representative Yen.
Madam Chairman, just to give people historical context, it was last changed to $50 in 1993 from $5. So it was originally $5 in 1993. It was changed to $50.
Thank you for that bit of history. We appreciate it. Representative Conrad.
Madam Chair, with reflection, I'd like to rescind or remove that amendment.
All right, that amendment has been withdrawn. Thank you very much for that. Are there any further amendments to the bill? Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Amendment in front of you. I'm gonna break this out. So I would say page 2, line 7, strike the word from another source. Page 2, line 20, strike the language from another source.
All right, is there a second on that amendment?
Second.
It's been moved by Hicks, seconded by Conrad. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Craigo.
Open the bringer of the amendment, repeat it.
Please repeat the amendment, Senator Hicks.
So, Madam Chairman, the amendment would be on page 2, line 7, which you have in front of you. Or 17, excuse me, line 17, strike from another source. And then a conforming amendment, which is page 2, line 20, strike the words from another source. And I think based on what the state engineers or testified to, is it eliminates any ambiguity, is exactly what we're doing here. It's still different. It has to be a source of supply, but I think by doing this, it clears up the statute that it's not do a change on the same system, same stream. I think it's fusion the way it's current. Testimony of the state engineer.
All right, does everyone understand? Senator Ellis?
Simply, if we're not careful, if you look at line 10, this is where it's talking about where the source of the appropriation is at times insufficient. Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if that's better, but it's on line 10, it says where the source of the appropriation is at times insufficient. So I'm just dealing with how we word what's on line 10. This sentence really falls apart when you pick out 2 pieces of it, but not that last part of it. So I get what everyone's saying. I just don't feel comfortable trying to do a quick fix on this. I think if someone wants to bring a more thoughtful approach to it, that's fine. But to me, just removing from another source in 17 and 20 doesn't get there without reworking line 10.
Representative Craigo.
Madam Chairman, and maybe this would be a friendly amendment, a little bit of wordsmithing. And I'll take a shot at it, based on the good senator's proposed amendment. So on line 17, remove the period, add the words or from another appropriator from the same source, period. And then you could take, and then remove the words from another source on line 20 because they would not be needed anymore. But you could add that language on line 17, take out the 3 words on line 20, and then I think it would read correctly, but I'm not positive.
Could you repeat that though?
All right, go ahead.
Madam Chairman.
Go ahead.
Line 17, after from another source, add the language or from another appropriator from the same source, period. And then on line 20, I think then it would be appropriate to take out the words from another source because we're just referencing the agreement between that person and another appropriator, which could be from the same source, a different source, any source.
All right, so Representative Craigo, you would reinsert from another source and add to it the language provided. And that, would that be considered a friendly amendment?
Madam Chairman, I do think that clarifies it. It gets rid of the confusion that it can be from the same source, just a different priority. And I think that would clean up any ambiguity and allow them to make the appropriate determination.
Okay, does everyone understand what we're doing? And the second agrees? Okay, go ahead. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to make sure I understand this because I am really reluctant to tinker with water statutes, unlike other statutes where I'm happy to tinker. When we brought this bill, or when this bill came before us, I mean, it really was to provide some clarity on page 4 by adding that additional language about loss and abandonment. I just want to make sure that this has been well vetted. And we're truly fixing a problem that exists. I mean, I think you could read this language and we heard from, you know, our water folks that this could be interpreted in a different way. I just want to know that we're actually solving a problem that exists. And if we're not solving a problem, I don't know that I really want to provide clarity or try and address an ambiguity if it really isn't a problem.
So
that's the question, Madam Chair.
Would have been directed at the state engineer.
Is this really a problem that we're seeing out there? Do we need to fix this too?
Go ahead, Mr. State Engineer.
Madam Chair, I have heard, I have not had them specifically, but I have heard of some of these exchange agreements, permittees asking that question. So there is some confusion as to what that from another source means. There is confusion both internally and externally with the state engineer's office.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to ask Chris what he thinks of the proposed wording from Representative Craigo.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, that might work. I've got a couple of things rattling around the back of my head. Number one, I don't have the current version of the SEO rules that deals with exchanges in front of me. And I've got something nagging at the back of my head that might not capture this fully. I think we need to recognize that this language not only contemplates an agreement between existing appropriators, but it also contemplates the ability to develop a new appropriation of unappropriated water. And so that piece is nagging me a little bit that it doesn't foreclose that opportunity as well. I don't know that it does, but I don't know that it doesn't. And so that's kind of where I'm at with this language. It might work. I think it might work better if you use the word appropriation as opposed to the word appropriator. But I'd like to, I think I need to think on it longer than just now.
Madam Chairman, just a quick question back to Chris. I mean, we can do this one of two ways. We can pass this amendment, and if it's screwed up, we can fix it, or we can subsequently work on language when we get to session that is more appropriate. I don't care one way or the other. But do you have any preference yourself on which way we go?
Madam Chair, Mr. Speaker, I know that this particular change was requested by the state engineer's office because we are seeing and we expect to see increased use of this statute. And so we would like to have it clarified for folks. And so I think it would be, it makes sense to me at least to go ahead and have something put in there. We'll study it some more. If we have anything we think might work better, we'll definitely bring it to the committee, either at your January meeting or during the session.
Is that an amendment seconded?
Yes, I can't remember who seconded your amendment, Representative Craigo. All right, well, I thought it was. Yes. Oh, this was a friendly amendment to the amendment. So, and Representative Conrad would be gracious enough to second it if we need one. Is that correct? All right, thank you so much for that. So does everybody understand the amendment to the amendment? And you are good. It was a friendly amendment, correct? All right. So is everyone ready to vote on the amendment? Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead, David.
since I'll have to put this in,
I guess David's not ready, so we're putting a pause on. Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to confirm because there was a suggestion to change appropriator to appropriation, I believe. So what was the preference on whether it read or from another appropriation versus appropriator?
All right, go ahead, Representative Craigo.
Madam
Take
Chair.
us home.
I have no preference on that. I'll take the advice of Mr. Brown, and for the time being, if the main movement is fine with that, we'll change it to appropriation.
All right, so we are changing it to appropriation. Is everyone clear on that? All right, go ahead, Representative Nyman.
What is the difference between appropriate?
Madam Chair, I think quite simply, the appropriation is the water right. The appropriator is the owner of the water right.
Representative Craigo,
I'm gonna do it after my.
that's fine.
Is it also true that an appropriation, you exchange with yourself on an appropriation versus another appropriator, which is an entity or individual?
Go ahead.
So Madam Chair, I believe the question was, can the same appropriator exchange with itself? I think that absolutely. In fact, the one that the state engineer mentioned was the same entity, different appropriations.
I think Senator Grew had his hand up. Could you maybe repeat the question in your response so Senator Grew can hear it? Are you okay, Senator?
It was hard to hear, so I just wanted to make sure I had it. Thanks.
Neither. Representative Craigo, I'm going to make an attempt to read your amendment back to Senator Guru so he knows what we're voting on. So it would be line 17, we would reinsert from another source and add or from another appropriation from the same source. Is that correct? All right, that is correct. That's what we're voting on. One more, go ahead. What? Yes, we were striking the second page, yeah, line 20 from another source. But I was just trying to clarify the friendly amendment that we were on. So that is the complete amendment. Is everyone clear on the amendment? All right, we're going to vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. That amendment has passed. We're back on the bill. Are there any further amendments on the bill?
Madam Co-Chair?
Yes, Senator Ellis.
I don't know if this is a request of LSO to draft a friendly amendment to conform with what we just adopted. But we just heard two scenarios where you have on page 2, lines 17 and 18 and 19. If such an appropriator arranges by agreement with another appropriator for the delivery and use of either stored direct flow or groundwater, the exchange agreement shall accompany the petition. Do we need to add language after the word appropriator on line 18 that also, and this is maybe a question too for the state engineer's office, in those instances where you have one person who is trying to exchange within his appropriated water rights. So same person, not one appropriator to another appropriator, but one appropriator, two different water rights exchanging. Do you guys want a copy of that exchange with your petition? We just had another scenario come up, so I just want to make sure we're conforming so there's no ambiguity. Does that make sense?
All right, who'd like to take that one? I don't see our state engineer online anymore. I'm not sure what's happened, but whichever one of you would like to take that question.
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I think, of course, what I believe that sentence is trying to capture is if you do have a deal between two separate appropriators, you're required to file the agreement with the petition. In the circumstance we have, the appropriator simply made all of the facts relative to both water rights subject to the petition itself. So I don't think any addition is necessary. I'm not sure if I answered what you were after.
Well, Madam Chair, so we just said that if I want to come up with an agreement with a friend to do an exchange, then I can provide that exchange agreement with my application or my request. But we just heard another example, which is why we added, why we changed appropriator to appropriation, where you have one person that has two rights and you're doing an exchange between the two rights. Do you want a copy of that or some kind of documentation to accompany the petition? Because right now it doesn't say it's required, but we just heard that example that that's a problem we're trying to address, or that's a scenario we're trying to foresee. So it's a conforming amendment to what we just did.
So Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, and I'm sorry if I didn't answer clearly, but in that circumstance where there is no agreement because you got unity and title of both of these water rights, the owner of both rights put all of the information in the petition itself. So we own this one, we own this one, we're going to make this water right available to satisfy this one.
Are you good? All right. Is there any further discussion or amendments on the bill? Discussion on the bill? Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Another proposed amendment from the state engineer, and that deals with the language.
Can you please speak in your microphone? None of us can hear you.
So we have another proposed amendment from the state engineer, and just like a little discussion on that. On page 3, line 18, and it deals with this injury. And so just a little explanation as to why that was requested by the state engineer's office.
All right. Mr. Brown.
Madam Chair, and I kind of skipped over that because I have the wrong version of the draft, so I apologize. That is another amendment the state engineer office identified, and it's relatively simple. This particular statute uses different language related to injury than any of the other statutes that we have. It has this notion of adversely affect as opposed to an injury. All of the other change statutes we have talk about injury, and for whatever reason, this particular statute talks about adversely affect. And we've, I think, some petitioners have suggested that it must mean something else than just injury to my water right, and have tried to leverage that into a broader range of potential injuries. So our suggestion is that this was originally intended to mean injury to the other water rights. We would like it to be consistent with the other statutes dealing with water right type changes.
So Madam Chairman, and I do think that,
go ahead, Brandon.
Thank you. Yeah, the reason we started looking into it was initially brought up by Speaker Summers with the term appropriators. And so we looked at what should we include to include the rights of the appropriator. And that's when we kind of did an analysis to compare it to other statutes. So it's more similar to other statutes. Our proposal would be more similar to the other statutes, as Chris mentioned.
So Madam Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Given that this is more conforming to existing statutory Title 41 water law. So I would move that we adopt the proposed amendment by the state. It's on page 3, line 18.
All right, and would you read the sentence as it would appear with that amendment?
So the amendment would strike adversely affect, that's the non-conforming language, and insert the rights of the appropriators will be injuriously affected thereby.
All right, do we have a second first? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks, did you want the other page 3, line 17? Did you do what I did?
Correct.
Didn't go
Yep.
above and
No,
grab everything?
same thing. We need to include that in that's included in my motion.
All right, good catch. So that'd be page 3 after line 17 after if strike the balance of the line. Okay, is there any, who seconded that? Senator Ellis? Okay, moved by Hicks, seconded by Ellis. Is there any discussion on this amendment? Discussion, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment has passed. Are there, I hate to ask, are there any further amendments on this bill?
Madam Chairman.
Gosh, Senator Hicks.
Yes, but before I provide the amendment, I have a question that'll help clarify why I'm going to bring the amendment. So I will ask the state engineer. So under a scenario where you have an exchange, because right now the language leans, it's back to this whole discussion we had with the temporary, where a junior water right holder, if he's injured, can stop the exchange. That's the way the current language is framed. So somebody that's junior. So in the context of junior, that's anybody out into the future that files a water right. And so let's hypothetically say that Mr. Reichel has executed an exchange with somebody for a territorial water right. And some new user comes along, and this is the question for the state engineer. So comes along and files a water right. For whatever purpose, because as long as it meets the beneficial use law, he can file a water right. Well, then let's assume that because of the exchange that is undertaken between an agricultural producer and somebody in Trona industry, the new junior, which is a 2027 water right, is going to say, I'm being damaged because of the exchange. Would that then negate the exchange agreement between those two entities? Junior, but they're going to be injured now.
All right, who from the state engineer's office would like to take that? Or would you like to roll the dice?
So just very quickly, Madam Chair, no is the answer to that question. They cannot turn it off.
Okay,
A new water.
That's correct.
But what about somebody that had a 2023 water right?
No.
go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Yeah. So-
Go ahead,
So
No.
okay, so Madam Chairman,
go ahead.
under this framework, can a junior have stopped the exchange
For an
Mr.
exchange.
Brown,
because of injury?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. On the front end, Senator Hicks, there is an injury analysis. And if during that analysis, the state engineer determines that it would injure a junior right, that would stop the exchange from being issued. Once the exchange gets issued, then a junior right to the providing right would not be able to turn it off.
Okay, so that helps clarify how that would work. But it's still, now we're inconsistent with the temporary water use agreement, because the junior water right now with the new language for the temporaries, a junior water right holder is, because it's now based on priority. But now under an exchange, if you have an existing water rights, and as I understand your explanation, Mr. Brown, is when you do the injury analysis and there's an injury to a junior, then they would not approve the exchange.
Mr. Brown,
Madam Chair, that is correct. And that's also correct for temporary water use agreement.
Even with the language that we just adopted.
Go ahead.
Yes, Senator Hicks. The language that we adopted did not remove the obligation for the state engineer to assess injury before issuing the order that approves the temporary water use agreement. The amendment that the committee is suggesting removes the ability of a junior to turn it off after the order has been issued. But in issuing the order, the state engineer still must consider injury to both senior and junior appropriators.
Okay, that
Does
helps
that help?
clarify that for me. So thank you. I have
All right.
no amendment.
No amendment.
Madam
Okay, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Chairman, thank you. And I just ask that you go back one more time and think through that temporary use piece that we did after we've amended it and make sure, you know, that you still think what you just said, because you know, I was kind of I supported the bill, but I was really concerned about the issue that Representative Craigo brought up. So I think we just need to make sure we have that right going forward on that other bill.
Don't you agree? Senator Hicks.
Absolutely.
All right. Any further discussion? Question having been called. Donna, could you please call the roll?
This is roll call on 24 LSO 0333 version 4 as amended. Senator Ellis. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Kolb.
Aye.
Senator Larson.
Aye.
Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Craigo.
Aye.
Representative Larson JT.
Excused.
Representative Nyman.
Aye.
Representative Yin. Vice Chair Summers.
Aye.
Chairman Steinmetz.
Aye.
Okay, Chairman Steinmetz, we have 11 aye and 1 excused.
That bill has passed, and at our January meeting, we'll decide which house, which chamber each of these bills will start in. So we'll put that idea away until then. The next item on our agenda is the High Savory Reservoir grazing lease. We discussed that a little bit yesterday at the workshop. I know this was your issue you raised, Senator Hicks. Do you have any further discussion on that item? And Director Mead, if you'd like to join him, we can visit about that if you'd like.
So, Madam Chairman, not all the members of Select Water, I don't think were able to attend the workshop. So I'll just frame it up and then phone a friend here if there's any more detailed information that the committee's interested in. So the state of Wyoming owns the High Savory Reservoir in Carbon County. And as part of that reservoir, there was acquisition of a number of parcels of private land and some state lands that are under the authority of the Office of State Lands and Investment. That project was constructed in 2005 and 6 and first filled in 2007. And so there's a substantial amount of land associated with the construction of that reservoir. And I've been requested and asked the office here is there's a number of adjacent landowners and permittees with BLM and state leases up there that would like to put that into a grazing system and lease those grazing rights. And it is under the title of the Wyoming Water Development Commission. And so the question that I asked the director is what are the limitations based on the permit conditions to do that? And I think he went through, and I'm not going to go through all of those, but the answer was it's possible, but there's a number of hoops that have to go through and a number of other entities because of the permit conditions that would require some level of cooperation and approval, including cooperation by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and ultimately some consultation with the Army Corps of Engineers associated with the 404 permit and the terms and conditions, the mitigation requirements. So with that discussion that we had at the workshop, the answer is yes, the water development could proceed with potentially issuing a grazing agreements with all of these caveats that you have to put together a grazing system. It has to be presented back to the Army Corps. We need to consult with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And so that's the issue. I don't know that Select Water at this point in time, other than make a recommendation to the commission that this is something that we would like to see them move forward with. That's the only really aspect for Select Water, because at this point in time, it would really be up to the sole discretion, bar some statutory change to mandate the commission to do that. And so my recommendation, the Select Water Committee would make a recommendation back to the Water Development Commission and the office to move forward with the development of a grazing plan and grazing leases under the terms and conditions that the commission feels are appropriate. And that's just a recommendation. It is a significant piece of land that could benefit a number of different agricultural producers up there. Again, it's going to have to be under an approved grazing plan with a number of those federal and state entities. So I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions for Senator Hicks? First, Representative Nyman, then Representative Conrad.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Hicks, I mean, previous to this, what has been the use of it? Has it been treated more like a refuge or an area? And how many acres are we talking about exactly?
I don't remember the total number of acres. I'll leave that. So prior to construction, these were private lands in some cases and state leases and BLM grazing allotments, and all of the lands were grazed. Every parcel up there that's currently either owned or leased by the Water Development Commission or under agreement with the BLM or grazed by agricultural producers.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just one further question. How long has it been since anything's been done with this land? How long has it been idle?
Well,
go ahead.
I think the acquisition of those properties happened in 2005 or 4 because early 2000s, because that had to happen before construction of the reservoir. So until the fences went up as part of the project, again, that was all done in 4, 5, and 6. So that would have been the last time that these properties would have been grazed by livestock.
All right. Are there any further questions? I'm going to open this up to the commission. If you would have any questions, if we might send you a recommendation, I'd sure like you to ask any questions you might have now. Commissioner, go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chairman. A question for Senator Hicks. And I guess something to consider in the discussion is enforcement of the grazing plan. How would that occur?
You repeat the question.
If the Water Development Office and Commission developed a grazing plan, I guess an important part of that plan would be the enforcement of the plan through time.
Go ahead.
Who would have that responsibility?
I think that would be part of the discussion because it depends on who's administering the lease. And as at the workshop, there was some discussion of who would actually administer the lease. Part of that discussion at the workshop was it's really not something that the Water Development Commission has done or has expertise in. So part of that discussion would be to consult with the Office of State Lands and Investment, who issues grazing leases all over the state, thousands of them, whether this was something that we would just adopt their terms and conditions and try to make it absolutely seamless as to how the state and the subdivisions of the state administer grazing leases. So under that scenario, I'm assuming that they have, I believe, 4 people around the state that administer their grazing lease program. And so under that scenario, but the specific answer to your question is that that's yet to be determined.
All right, Vice Chairman Summers.
Madam Chairman, just a question on who's going to ultimately have this lease. And is this going to benefit one individual? In other words, are we tailoring this where really only one individual is going to be able to use this lease?
Madam Chairman, Representative Summers, I don't think so, because of the nature of these parcels. So you've got mitigation property 30 miles downstream of the dam that doesn't fit in anybody's operation of the 3 permittees that run operations around the dam. So it's highly unlikely, given the 1,100 acres down there, that one permittee. At the end of the day, I think I would say it's very unlikely that would happen. And the other thing is depends on how this was structured. They may not want to do continuing rights like you do with your, right of first refusal to renew those permits with the Office of State Lands, or they could just go to a competitive bid. You understand the logistics of moving and working through somebody else's private property and allotments. It's highly likely that there is at least 3 different permittees around the reservoir or adjacent private landowners or leases of state and BLM ground that may be interested in that. Downstream on what we call the McMillan Place property, it's more likely because there's one landowner that abuts all of the sides of that, but that wouldn't preclude somebody because it is kind of an area that different permittees trail through. So I guess the answer to your question is it'd be highly unlikely that it'd benefit just one person.
Well, did one person request you to do this?
I've had 2 different requests from adjacent landowners to the 2 different disparate parcels.
All right. Any further questions? All right. Is there a motion on the floor?
Madam Chairman, just to the second part of I believe it was a Representative Nyman's or Summers' question is how many acres are involved.
Okay.
It's just under 3,000.
3,000 acres. All right.
And I would say this is in a fairly high precip zone, and so you're down to that 10 acres per AUM in some cases, 20 depending on how shallow those soils are up there. So we're potentially talking anywhere maybe up as high as 300 animal unit months on that. So
okay. All right, I'd go back to the committee. Does anyone want to make a motion or have any further discussion?
Just curious.
Go ahead, Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the thought would be is this money would go back into water development, lease money.
Go ahead, Director
Generating
Mead. Do you know, would that go back into the program or would we structure that, Senator Hicks, how that works?
again, I think that's yet to be determined, but that only makes sense where they're the landowner. They ought to derive the benefit of the revenue generated off of that property. I would say that it would also alleviate some cost of the program, because right now all of these are fenced, and all of that fencing requirement falls back on the cost of the program to maintain those fences and stuff. Typical with grazing leases, it's the permittee's responsibility to maintain all the improvements. Right now, the water development program is paying somebody to go around and maintain those fences. So there would be a little bit of cost savings there to the program, but I would think that the revenues would go back to the water development office.
Have any comments or discussion?
Madam Chairwoman, just High Savory has an O&M account set up, just like Fontenelle, just like Buffalo Bill, et cetera. And I guess my thoughts would be if this were something I got put into place, whatever revenues came off that grazing would go back into that O&M account to then be turned around and be able to be used for replacement of gates or whatever operation and maintenance we'd have to do for the project, since the lands are associated with the High Savory Reservoir project. The other thing I would mention, Senator Hicks mentioned the 2,900 acres, roughly 1,850 are right around the reservoir. So I don't know if we would need to do additional fencing to keep cattle out of the reservoir. That was something that would have to be discussed as part of this grazing management plan. And I would also point out that I think the Water Development Commission has the authority to manage and maintain the project, the High Savory Reservoir project. So if we were to proceed forward with it, it would be in that vein of manage and maintain, and then probably looking back towards language in the 404 permit, which talks about grazing being used as a management tool to enhance or maintain riparian mitigation areas. Again, to maintain mitigation success or be beneficial to upland habitat mitigation areas. So that's where our authorities would lie. We don't currently have the authority, I don't think, to just lease grazing property for that particular purpose. So it would be under the management and maintenance of the project that we would be able to do this, I believe. Our attorney went.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Chairman, thank you. I was out of the room a minute, so I want to understand what motion are we making to do what, for who, for why? I mean, the what and the why I've kind of heard now, but what is this motion? I mean, does the department already have the ability to do this? Are we just making a recommendation? What are we doing here?
Mr. Vice Chairman, the reason I mentioned that is we had discussed, maybe while you were out of the room, just whether the committee would like to make a recommendation to the commission to pursue looking into how this might be accomplished if we did want to lease those lands for grazing. So I think that would be the recommendation or the motion I would be looking for if the committee wants to proceed on this issue. So just kind of to wrap it up and decide where we're headed, just for the expediency of time and committee time.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, it's just a recommendation.
Senator Kolb.
Chairman, I'd make that recommendation I'd make the motion that we put forth a recommendation to the Water Development Commission that they would develop a policy and procedures for allowing grazing on the High Savory Reservoir as presented.
All right, moved by Senator Kolb. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Nyman. Any discussion? Discussion, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion passes. Is there anything further?
Risk of running too long, Madam Chairman, I'm just going to throw out right now, not for discussion, but to think about, is that at least some of these properties that as we move forward, we may want to consider putting those into a perpetual conservation easement. If that was something that the 404 permit would allow, that money goes back into water development, and then those lands move into private ownership. It's just something that I think as we look at these and at other reservoir projects that it's a tool in the toolbox that wasn't explored back when this was done, but I think it would be a better way to move forward. It's just something this may be that we want to discuss in the future as to whether we would entertain perpetual conservation easements on these type of properties. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hickson. I think that's a discussion for another day, but it's good for everyone to put that in their thinking caps and see if you would be amenable to that. With that, I would take public comment on the High Savory Reservoir grazing lease. Is there any public comment? Public comment on this issue? Seeing none, we'll go into the supplemental water bill discussion, and we are only 10 minutes behind schedule, so we're doing pretty well. We were talking about, as we discussed today, there are several projects that were a do not fund recommendation, both because of different situations that they are facing. Some weren't districts yet and other issues. And we, as the Select Water Committee, could decide to do one of two things. We're talking about the supplemental water bill. In the past, we have had supplemental water bills that we use general funds for, or we could roll them into the omnibus water bill as well, or bills, and just specify that those would be funded through general fund appropriations. And so we have asked the commission to, and the director of water development, to get us a list and prioritize that list. And so they will have that for us tomorrow morning. And then we can look through that and go through that tomorrow afternoon after the commission gets through with their business for that day. So is there any further discussion or requests of the office for that subject looking forward to tomorrow? Anything from the committee? All right, seeing none, is there any other business or public comment on any other issue? Seeing none, we are adjourned and we'll see you tomorrow morning at